All right, strap yourselves in, because today we're going deep, deep into the world of Freemasonry. But, and this is a big but, we're ditching the history books. We're going right to the source. Well, kinda, right? We've got these accounts, 3 of them, and get this, they're all from transcribed YouTube videos
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
all things. Yeah, YouTube videos of regressive hypnosis sessions.
Yeah, that's right. It's fascinating stuff, to see what people remember or think they remember under hypnosis. But we got to be careful, right? I mean, memories, especially those from hypnosis, they can be pretty subjective, influenced by all sorts of things, beliefs, the hypnotists even. So we'll be diving into these accounts, but also keeping in mind the actual history of Freemasonry.
Okay, so let's dive in. One thing that really jumped out at me was how all 3 sources kind of paint this picture of Freemasonry being this incredibly powerful, almost like a shadowy organization. Like they all talked about secret meetings, rituals, a strict hierarchy, and all of it geared towards like controlling resources and influencing, global events.
Yeah, I see that. Definitely a recurring theme when people talk about Freemasonry, right? Both in popular culture and, even some scholarly work, this whole idea of power and control. What I found interesting, though, was that 2 of the sources claim that Freemasonry goes back, like, way back thousands of years, predating its official establishment in the 1700s, which is pretty wild.
Ah, right. That's way older than what most people think.
Mhm.
One source even described Freemasons like emerging
Yeah.
as these powerful figures after like a devastating global event, possibly a flood even, almost like they were just waiting, for the right moment to seize control.
Yeah. I see the connection you're making. It does fit a historical pattern, doesn't it? Powerful groups using chaos and upheaval to increase their influence, like religious institutions after the Black Death, or political factions gaining power after wars. When things fall apart, someone's always there to pick up the pieces.
It really makes you think, like, are these accounts reflecting real history? Or maybe just like subconscious anxieties about, societal collapse? Is it a magnification of these historical patterns, but through the lens of like hypnotic regression?
Wow.
Or is it more deliberate, like a strategy they've been using all along?
Tough questions, but worth asking for sure. Now, another thing that kept popping up was this idea of catastrophic events happening right before the rise of Freemasonry. 2 sources specifically mentioned a flood.
Yeah. And one source, oh man, they describe this massive griffin statue that acts like a portal linking to like another dimension or reality. And they said this portal was like super important to the origins of Freemasonry.
Oh, wow. That's a vivid image. The griffin, it's a pretty powerful symbol in mythology, right? Guardian of treasures, divine power, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And while it's not like a traditional Masonic symbol, it does touch on those themes of power, protection, and accessing hidden knowledge, which are pretty central to a lot of interpretations of Freemasonry.
Right. So maybe this portal is like a metaphor, a bridge between the material world and some higher realm of knowledge or power. Or, maybe it's literal, like a gateway to another dimension, as the source suggests. It just adds this whole layer of mystery.
Definitely adds to the mystery. And speaking of mystery, this brings us to something else that came up in these accounts. The whole metaphysical side of Freemasonry. I mean, all 3 sources described a really strong supernatural component, going beyond just the usual symbols and rituals.
Right. They weren't just talking about secret handshakes and, like, cryptic symbols. They were talking about non-human entities influencing or even controlling Freemasons. And they weren't, like, shy about it either. Some described these entities as reptilian or even demonic. Pretty intense stuff.
That's where it gets really interesting, from like an esoteric perspective. The idea of non-human entities messing with human affairs. It pops up in a lot of occult traditions and belief systems throughout history, really. Whether we take those entities literally or see them as like symbolic representations of psychological forces, that's a whole other debate.
Right. One source, they talked about these specific rituals and symbols that supposedly act as conduits for energy and power. It makes you wonder, do the symbols actually hold power, or is it the belief people put into them that matters?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how symbols and belief systems, interact with human psychology. I mean, symbols don't inherently mean anything, right? It's us, we give them meaning. But once we do, they can become incredibly powerful. They shape how we see things, our emotions, even our actions.
So, thinking about Freemasonry, maybe these symbols are creating a sense of belonging, power, control for the members.
Exactly. And that sense of power, it can get amplified by the rituals and ceremonies that are like a big part of Masonic tradition. Rituals shrouded in secrecy, full of symbolism. They can have a powerful psychological impact. They create awe, mystery, a sense of belonging.
Right. And one source, they described this like chilling initiation ritual, where potential members had to witness a sacrifice and, like, suppress all their emotions to prove their loyalty?
Hmm, that's heavy. But it does echo tactics used by cults and other secretive organizations, you know? Break down the individual, enforce conformity. It creates a strong bond between members, but also a dependence on the group.
Now, when it comes to membership, who can actually become a Freemason? The sources seem to say it's mostly hereditary, passed down through families, like a birthright.
Huh. That's interesting because historically Freemasonry has been open to men from lots of different backgrounds and social classes, but the idea of lineage, inherited affiliation, it fits with their emphasis on tradition, continuity, right? Like a deeper level of commitment, a sense of belonging that goes beyond just being a member.
And that brings us to the big question. How much control does Freemasonry really have over, global events? Are they the puppet masters? Or are they pawns in a bigger game?
That's what makes these accounts so interesting, right? We're dealing with multiple layers of interpretation. We've got the documented history of Freemasonry, with its focus on brotherhood, charity, personal development. And then we have these accounts, through hypnosis, that suggest something darker, more manipulative.
Almost like we're looking at two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And we have to decide which side we're going to focus on, which narrative we believe.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, both sides are true to some extent. Freemasonry, like any complex human institution, can be a force for good and bad, right? Inspire charity and brotherhood, but also harbor secrets and wield power in less than transparent ways.
Well, I'm definitely more curious now. I'm ready to go deeper into these claims about power, control, and this whole metaphysical side of Freemasonry.
Excellent. Let's keep digging into these narratives and see what other insights we can uncover.
So these accounts, they're pretty wild, right? Like Freemasonry as this secret society with ancient knowledge, hidden forces, the whole 9 yards. But before we go full conspiracy theory, I got to ask, how much of this should we actually believe?
The million-dollar question, right? It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, the mystery, especially when you're talking about hypnosis and conspiracies, but a healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing. Got to approach these accounts with a critical eye.
Right. We can't just assume everything these people remember under hypnosis is accurate or even objective. Their memories, they could be influenced by their beliefs, pop culture, even the hypnotist, like you said earlier.
Exactly. And that's why context is so important, like we were talking about before. The idea of powerful groups using chaos to their advantage, that's a pattern throughout history, right? So maybe these hypnotic regressions are like tapping into a collective anxiety about, society collapsing, powerful groups taking over.
So instead of Freemasons literally orchestrating these events, maybe it's more like we're projecting those fears onto them.
Could be. Doesn't mean Freemasonry doesn't have any power or influence in the real world, of course. But we have to be careful about separating, documented history from speculation and fear-based narratives.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the specifics? Like the Griffin portal, the rituals with sacrifices. Are those just symbols, or could they point to something real?
Now that's where things get really interesting. The Griffin portal, yeah, it could be symbolic, but portals and gateways, they pop up all over the place in esoteric traditions and occult beliefs, often representing a transition between different realms, access to hidden knowledge, that kind of thing.
So maybe the source, even if they weren't being literal, they were still tapping into these archetypal themes.
Yeah.
Themes that connect with certain esoteric beliefs.
Exactly. And with rituals, it's important to remember rituals are everywhere, right? Not just in secret societies. They serve different purposes. Social bonding, marking life transitions, connecting with the sacred.
Right, and in Freemasonry, even if they're not as extreme as the accounts suggest, they could still be designed to create that sense of awe, mystery, and exclusivity.
For sure. And that exclusivity, it adds to the perception of power and influence that surrounds these secret societies.
Now, these accounts also mention that, like, modern Freemasonry might be different from how it was in the past. Maybe they've strayed from their original goals or become more focused on personal gain than, global domination.
Yeah, one source talked about a shift from those big plans of societal upheaval to a more localized, almost bureaucratic kind of control. Like, modern Freemasons are more interested in maintaining their influence within existing power structures than, orchestrating huge world events.
So they traded revolution for a seat at the table, huh?
Something like that. Maybe it reflects how power works in the world today, right? It's not so much about brute force anymore, but more about subtle control through finances, media, technology.
So maybe modern Freemasons, instead of plotting to take over the world, are more focused on navigating these complex systems of power.
It's a possibility. Now, one thing that I found really fascinating was how often these accounts mentioned catastrophic events happening before the rise of Freemasonry. Remember, the flood.
Yeah. And one source even said that Freemasons, they were involved in the events that led to the flood. Crazy, right? Oh, and they mentioned the Griffin portal again, saying it played a role in those events, connecting them to some kind of ancient knowledge or power. I know it's a wild claim, but it makes you think about lost civilizations, hidden histories.
Absolutely. And even if we don't have concrete evidence to support these claims, they definitely tap into that fascination we have with ancient mysteries, the idea that there are hidden forces shaping our world.
Like a real-life Indiana Jones movie, right?
Yeah.
Secret societies guarding ancient artifacts that could change everything.
Uh-huh, exactly. And that brings us to another theme that kept popping up. The idea that Freemasons, they're just the shield, protecting even more powerful hidden forces. One source even described these forces as being non-human, with their own agenda for humanity.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy, not gonna lie.
It is. But even if we take those claims with a grain of salt, they still raise important questions about the nature of power. Are there forces at play that we don't even understand? It's worth considering.
So let's say, just for fun, that these sources are onto something real. What could these hidden forces be? And what would they want with us?
Ah, now that's the big mystery, isn't it? It's a question that has kept people guessing for centuries. Philosophers, theologians, conspiracy theorists, everyone. Some think these forces are good, guiding us towards some higher level of consciousness, spiritual evolution. Others say they're evil, trying to control and manipulate us.
Or maybe it's not so simple, right? Maybe they operate outside of our ideas of good and evil with goals we can't even grasp.
Exactly. That's what keeps this topic so interesting. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, to accept that there might be things in the universe we just don't get.
Okay, so we've talked about hidden forces, changes in Freemasonry, catastrophic events. But what about the members themselves? What do these accounts say about their motivations, their experiences?
Well, one source talked about a lot of ambition and competition within the lodges, like a constant struggle for power and influence, members fighting for higher positions, access to knowledge.
So it's not all brotherhood and charity then. There's a darker side, a drive for personal gain, maybe even at the expense of others.
That's definitely suggested in these accounts. And it makes you think about the psychological effects of belonging to a group like that. So secretive, so hierarchical. Does it create a sense of elitism, detachment from society? Does it encourage conformity and obedience?
Those are good questions. What happens to those who don't fit in? The ones who question the rules or don't want to conform?
That's where things get a bit darker, yeah. One source said that people who dissent or try to leave, they often end up, well, not in a good way. They described a system of control, surveillance, to make sure members stay loyal and silent.
That's scary. It paints a picture of an organization that's not just secretive, but potentially dangerous for anyone who steps out of line.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that Freemasonry, at least according to these accounts, is more than just a social club or a charity. It's a power structure with its own rules and consequences.
Okay, we've talked about power dynamics, hidden agendas, the risks of challenging the organization. But what about women? Are they completely excluded?
Ah, good question. And it gets to a complex and often controversial aspect of Freemasonry. Historically, yeah, it's been a men's-only club. And a lot of traditional lodges still hold on to that rule.
Yeah, two of our sources specifically said women aren't allowed to be full members.
Right. But those same sources also hinted that women are involved somehow. One mentioned a strict ratio of men to women in the lodges, suggesting that women might have supporting roles or be part of, like, auxiliary organizations.
So they're allowed to peek in, but not fully participate.
That's one way to see it. And it reflects a long-standing debate within Freemasonry about the role of women. Right? Some say the brotherhood aspect, the male bonding, is essential to their traditions. Others say excluding women is outdated, discriminatory.
It's a complicated issue for sure. Adds another layer to our exploration of Freemasonry. Speaking of which, one detail that really stuck with me was the source who said that Freemasons, they've been shaping major historical events. They even said their symbols are hidden in important documents, like the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, that's a common conspiracy theory, right? That Freemasons have been pulling the strings for centuries. We got to be careful with those claims, but there are some historical connections that are worth looking into.
Like, a lot of the Founding Fathers were Freemasons,
Yeah.
right? And some historians say that Masonic principles of liberty, equality, fraternity, they influenced the development of American democracy.
Right. Might be a stretch to say they orchestrated the whole American Revolution, but
Yeah.
their presence, their influence, it was definitely there.
So how do we separate fact from fiction when it comes to Freemasonry and their supposed influence on history?
It's tough, but it comes down to examining the evidence, understanding the historical context, and staying skeptical. Gotta watch out for confirmation bias, that tendency to only see what supports our beliefs.
Right, it's easy to see patterns and connections that aren't really there, especially when you're talking about secret societies and conspiracies.
Exactly. So a balanced perspective is key. We got to acknowledge the documented history of Freemasonry, the fraternal aspects, the Enlightenment ideals, but also be open to the possibility that there might be more to the story.
So we end up with this puzzle, with pieces that don't quite fit. The documented history, the esoteric beliefs, the conspiracy theories, and these hypnotic regression accounts. What do we do with all of that?
That's the beauty and the challenge of exploring topics like this. There's no easy answer, no single truth. It's about embracing the mystery, looking at things from different angles, and ultimately coming to our own conclusions based on the evidence and our intuition.
Okay, I'm ready for the last part of our deep dives. Let's see what other insights we can find. All right, so we've really dug deep into Freemasonry, haven't we? The history, the symbols, the rituals, and those hints of like hidden agendas, powerful forces, all that. But as we wrap things up, I'm really curious to get your take on one of the most, well, maybe unsettling themes from these hypnotic regression accounts.
Yeah.
The non-human entities.
Yeah, that's a topic that really gets people thinking, doesn't it? I mean, all three sources, they talk about Freemasons being influenced or even controlled by these beings, often described as, reptilian, demonic.
One source even said that these entities, they feed off the negative energy from human conflict and suffering.
Yeah.
That's a pretty dark thought. It kind of gives me the chills, honestly.
It definitely fits with a lot of conspiracy theories and occult beliefs out there.
Yeah.
This idea that, evil forces are manipulating us for their own twisted ends. It's a concept that's been around for a long time, often used to explain why bad things happen, why there's injustice in the world.
But how does that line up with history? I mean, Freemasonry's been around for centuries, right? If these entities were really in control, wouldn't we see more evidence?
Yeah, that's a fair point, and it's where critical thinking comes in. We can't just accept those claims at face value. Got to look for other explanations, like maybe these accounts are reflecting our own fears, anxieties, projecting our own dark side onto these mysterious organizations.
So instead of literal reptilian overlords running the show, maybe it's more about our own capacity for greed, manipulation, violence that we're seeing.
Could be. It's also worth considering that these hypnotic regressions, they might be tapping into those deep archetypal symbols and stories that are part of human consciousness, Like the serpent, for example, that's a powerful symbol in so many cultures, representing both wisdom and temptation, creation and destruction.
So the reptilian imagery, maybe it's not literal, but it's tapping into those deeper themes, representing like the dark side of human nature or how power can corrupt.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating, so complex. It's psychology, symbolism, the possibility of things beyond our understanding all mixed together.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure.
Uh-huh.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about?
I think the biggest takeaway is to be discerning, Don't just believe everything you hear, but don't dismiss everything either. Question things, explore, be open to different perspectives, even those that challenge your own.
And sometimes the best mysteries are the ones that stay unsolved, right?
Absolutely. The world is full of wonder and possibilities. And maybe the real value in exploring topics like this isn't about finding all the answers, but about expanding our awareness, understanding more, and embracing the mystery that's part of being human.
Well said. This has been a fascinating journey into the world of Freemasonry. We've uncovered clues about power, secrecy, and maybe even forces we can't fully grasp. And even though we might never know the whole truth, exploring it has been pretty eye-opening.
It has. And the journey of discovery, it never really ends, does it?
Nope, it sure doesn't. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those minds open, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time for another adventure into the unknown.